Hello and welcome to
CRHEATE.
I'm delighted to be joined today by Rob Sullivan, Creative Director at the University of Sheffield. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Ian. Happy New Year.
And to you, sir, and to you. We're going to be talking about two projects today. The first one being the redesign of the University of Sheffield logo. And Rob, I just wonder if you could kick us off by saying what prompted that project starting.
Sure. So just to give a bit of context, I've been at the University of Sheffield now for two and a half years. And when I first started, literally on my third day, I was asked into a meeting about the direction of the sort of university brand. I didn't really know too much about it as a new employee, didn't know a huge amount about it. But it was quite evident quickly that there'd been a lot of appetite for change, which I think that was so important that, you know, there was already buy-in from sort of boardroom level. Because as you know, if you don't have that buy-in, it can be really, really hard to actually achieve anything, get anything done. So it was quite a fast process in that, you know, there'd been recognition that the brand needed to evolve. There hadn't been a brand update for 20 odd years. And, you know, in that time, digital, social, all the channels that were, you know, coming online, the university identity wasn't equipped for that. It was born from a print age. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was widely recognized that it had to change. And it also sort of clarify it was a brand refresh opposed to a rebrand per se, because, you know, the goals hadn't changed at the university. That sort of the criteria for a full rebrand would be, you know, you've got a new target audience, mm-hmm. Market conditions have changed, or there's a new sort of C-level management group, but there was none of those things. So it was really about taking all the bits that had equity and value, mm-hmm. and just kind of streamlining them, making them appropriate for a digital age. So it was about, you know, accessibility and just sort of looking at how we could kind of amplify the identity without reinventing the wheel.
So let's take a look at the results of that. So what were the guiding principles that you used behind your design process, Rob?
So really it was about looking at how we make the identity more accessible. It wasn't really fit for purpose in a digital kind of format. And because as I mentioned, I was quite new to the organization, I had an outsider's perspective. So I had quite a unique kind of look at, you know, well, why is the identity over 4 lines? You know, why do we have the? You know, so I had all these questions, and the answers weren't always. Well, I've never really thought about that before. You know, the provenance of the bits and pieces of the identity weren't obviously apparent. So I just questioned a lot of things. One of the challenges that the old identity had was when there was like a co-funded or co-driven piece with other universities or organisations. In the logo strip at the bottom, you could barely see the word Sheffield. And that kind of pertained to a larger sort of conversation around, you know, both universities, the council, about, you know, how do we promote Sheffield? You know, we've done some great things. We're not great at shouting about it. And the visual personification of that was that tiny little Sheffield in our sort of brand identity. So, you know, for me, it was quite obvious that, well, let's just make that bigger, lose the, run it over 2 lines, and then you've instantly got a much larger footprint for Sheffield. So that was an obvious thing to do. And to be honest, when you then create a document around, you know, if we increase the size of this and actually show them in situ, it becomes a really powerful couple of slides of actually that's where we were, and our Sheffield was tiny, and then suddenly we've got one that's twice the size and as big as other universities and our competition. Then it made it a far more sort of tangible sort of reason on why we did it.
Excellent. Well, yeah, and it's really noticeable. Even a change that appears as obvious as that is not obvious to everybody.
No, that's right. So luckily, because I have that outsider perspective, I think that instantly didn't make sense to me.
Exactly that. And it's like any organizations in any sector, and it's certainly relevant to universities, that the value of both the internal and external viewpoint when it comes to creativity is so important, because you need the depth of knowledge that the internal team have very often got, like what works, what doesn't work, what's been tried before, etc. And the as I say, that depth of knowledge about some of the practices, etc. But that external viewpoint, to be able to question incisively about things, even as simple as that have a critical impact on the result. So did you change fonts at the same time?
Yeah, so again, every kind of decision we made wasn't arbitrary at all. It was, looking at a more accessible font, because the font we had was a purpose-built font based on an old Gothic font, which kind of had inaccessible kind of curves, and it didn't read very well. There wasn't a very kind of a large degree of weight to it. So it wasn't a great font. Not many people really liked it. And so what we wanted to do, I mean, in an ideal world, have a custom design font, just for the university, but to actually then implement that across all the university's laptops and screens and presentations is a real undertaking. So what we decided to do was look at all the fonts we could use around sort of open source fonts, and accessibility. What had the most accessible character elements, overseas kind of glyphs. We had to look at the entire kind of gamut of the applications. So we decided on the source family, because it's got the formal kind of serif, but a very informal and friendly kind of sans serif, which is and great accessibility. The tails on the L, there was we had front and foremost, we had accessibility in mind, and application. So the source family, just for us, was a really great font to use, because it was easy to implement across Google Slides, Word, our IT internet and intranet, sorry, and the full weight of fonts meant we could be so much more expressive.
And I think it's incredible, actually, the impact, the result of the work that you've done has contemporized the university. It just has. It feels like it's now very much part of a contemporary organization, as opposed to one that is harking back. I mean, did you at any point sort of consider how relevant, for instance, the kind of heraldic symbology was within the refresh that you were looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we didn't want to do is like chuck out all of the equity that we have in, because the crest itself, is born through certain elements of, history of the university and pertaining to Sheffield. So we still have our heritage coat of arms, which we use on graduations and, official sort of ceremonies. So we still have that. But for our shop front, so to speak, we have our sort of our identity, which is based on what we've created recently. Yeah, that's great. And obviously quite a change in color palette. What was your sort of thinking behind that? Yeah, so at the start of it, I said to the brand team, color will be the most divisive thing that we come across in this. We're going to have so much opinion about a color, whether someone hates it or loves it. So we have to try and keep subjectivity out of it, which is virtually impossible when it comes to color palettes, as you know. So what we looked at is the existing color palette. It was a CMYK logo, so it was born through a print kind of time. The secondary palette, there are a lot of colors which were never used. They weren't particularly nice colors. They weren't accessible colors. So really, there was like 3 or 4 secondary colors that were mostly used. So everything looked kind of drab. And again, it was born through print. It was never designed, or the internet really hadn't even been invented really when the first sort of color palette iteration came about. So it was about, how will it work on social platforms? What kind of colors do our target audience, what do they see every day? What do they feel is kind of natural in the space that they kind of view things on? So we've got a wider sort of palette, which is very much based on sort of social colors, always accessible, but much more vibrant. So we've dialed up the vibrancy and the personality of the color palette, making it look less corporate.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, our core palette, so we've got 3 colors. So we've got our deep purple sort of color, deep violet, our powder blue, and we've got midnight black. So those 3 core, more corporate colors, they still retain that formality and that kind of professionalism. But when we then combine that with our wider secondary palette, it's a really nice sort of juxtaposition of sort of form, sort of in terms of, tone of voice and that kind of stuff, which works really well. But the original color that the university used was actually a really, really dark purple color. And most people thought it was dark blue, but it was actually a dark purple. So what we've really done is really dialed up the personality. So it's still this violet color that we went with, but in terms of how we had to present that to have a more objective kind of reasoning, is like, okay, let's look at all the universities around our sort of major competitive kind of landscape. There's tons of reds, there's tons of blues, there's some that have black, just pure black logos, which is, a more sort of niche sort of color palette to choose. But we saw some opportunities around this kind of violet color. And then when you take accessibility into it, so we know it can't be a green or a yellow because that's not really accessible. We then had a really firm basis of, right, we can just shift over here into this violet color. There's only 3 or 4 other universities that use it, but it still retains that link to where we were, because we were actually a very sort of dark purple color to start with. So it transitioned without going too far, and to fill the gaps in around accessibility and around the competition, and to create some degree of clear space from a large sort of blue or red majority, that kind of led us into a more objective reasoning, which kind of was easier to sell in. But there was still a lot of resistance to the color, because people obviously see colors differently as well, which doesn't help. So but I think over time, it's been over a year now since the rollout, and I think people are really, really liking it now. Like, we've had overwhelming positive kind of feedback on the palette. It's kind of, it's where it should be.
No, well, that's fantastic. It's a great piece of work, and I think you've rightly been awarded for that work with various awards. So that's that's a great testament to what you've done.
Oh, it was a team effort, wasn't all me.
No, well, absolutely, you as a team. Yeah, good stuff. Thank you very much, Rob.
No worries.
So the second piece of work that I'd like to pick up with Rob about is the rebrand of the performance venues at Sheffield University. So many universities, Rob, have performance spaces that are or aren't open for public use. Was a more commercial angle the driving force behind the refresh that you did at Sheffield?
Yeah, it certainly played a major part in it. The Octagon Centre is a renowned sort of live gig venue. Obviously, it's a service to the university for graduations, and it's really the start of a student's journey starts there and it ends there. So it's integral to students throughout their careers at the university. But yeah, the gig going public, the Octagon Centre is a really great venue, which so many bands over time have played there. The Who, there's been Zeppelin, there's been an Excess, there's been every band who's ever been something have played there. It's an iconic place. So there was a major sort of commercial sort of drive sort of through it, but it kind of came on the back of the refresh of the university. Like, we never really knew how to approach brand architecture before, so we had to look how do we approach this, because it's kind of, as you kind of know, it's a unique space because it does have that commercial entity, so it kind of has a little bit more flexibility, I guess. So we kind of looked at the identity, but in a really stripped back way. So one of the things I did with the management team at Performance Venues was take them through like a brand workshop. When I say identity, what do I mean by that? Are we looking at logo? Are we looking at the visual language that supports the logo? So there was really just a real getting them to understand what I was talking about, because one thing I've learned over my career is not everyone understands identity like I do, and I shouldn't assume that when I walk into a room, but you sometimes do. Sometimes think everyone's on your page, but they sometimes aren't. So it's kind of due diligence to go through like a brand workshop, work out what the tone of voice is, the personality, the proposition, helping them around that kind of wording and that kind of positioning, and then looking at other kind of performance venues, but outside of education sector. So even looking at exhibition spaces, museums, how do they approach their identity? And when they've got like multiple kind of parts of the business, how do their brand architectures apply? So we understood there was three core parts. So there's performance venues, the master brand, and then there was the concert series, and then there's Enable Us. So there's those three kind of parts of the business, and how do they all work together? And in the past, it didn't look like they were a connected entity. They look kind of a mishmash of sort of shapes and colors, which kind of didn't really feel like a family. So we looked at stripping back the identity to just essentially a square, because the stage is a square space, which kind of represented, what happens in the venues on a stage, and then creating a visual language around it. So we weren't creating a logo per se; it was more a visual language around the logo. So the logo itself is very pared back; it's stripped back, minimal. And then we build this really expressive sort of visual language, which can be kind of modular, like you can add and take away bits to it, and it's easy to update for the in-house team to update it and sort of manipulate it to various sort of things they need to do. But it still retains obviously the university color palette, and it feels like it's still part of the university. So that's kind of the balancing out that we had to do, really. We're not going full commercial because it's still very much part of the university, but it retains a brand architecture system.
Yeah, well, it's what really struck me with it is how well it works large and small. Its impact large is fantastic. I mean, it's very expressive, and then often when you see those sorts of things used in smaller spaces, maybe even, for instance, on websites, even particularly when you're looking off your phone, they lose something of their impact. But I think there's still something. There's still a sort of fluidity in the design, something that's sort of very expressive that lends itself to that idea of performance. So I think you've really captured something very powerful there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the team were really happy with it, and it was quite easy to get buy-in on it. And because again, it was like taking them on a journey. So it wasn't a massive surprise when we sort of presented the creative deck, because I showed them what other kind of sectors are doing, and how they use imagery and typography, however they apply it. So it's kind of, you're prepping them basically for something that's quite different. Yeah, but they really bought into it. So that was great.
And have you got any? Have you produced any film or animated assets to go with this yet?
No. Obviously, we've got like the website is we create the website for them. We haven't done anything, no motion graphics yet. Again, obviously, we could have that in the future. We don't know yet, but yeah, you can see how it could work.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm almost waiting to see that now. Because it's like it's waiting for it. I mean, it could be great title sequences and things like that, for events and performances and all that kind of stuff. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rob.
No problem.
Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for sharing your work and the processes that you went through on that. And I look forward to seeing more, talking more, and meeting up, hopefully.
Absolutely. Cheers, Ian. It was a pleasure.